From Software games have a reputation of being difficult. It's a big part of the charm, and why I enjoy their games so much. When Dark Souls released with its famous tagline, "Be prepared to die," that wasn't a warning or to scare you off. It was a mindset. You are going to die a lot. Don't let that frustrate you or get you down. It's a big part of the gameplay, and dying is even a mechanic within the game. A big part of From Software's design philosophy is giving the player challenging content to overcome. The best reward is learning and defeating boss encounters that seemed impossible at first. And I 100% agree with that. There really is something to be said about the thrill and rush of when a boss encounter finally clicks and you get that hard-earned victory. So Armored Core 6 is the most recent From Software title, and what makes this one stand out to me is the difficulty of the first mission's boss encounter. And as much as I love a challenge, I think that they push this one a bit too far. So the first mission is basically a tutorial. With that in mind, it starts off really easy, lulling you into a false sense of security. You're introduced to the basic controls and mechanics, and all the initial enemies are pretty easily taken out. But then you get to the end of the stage, and this huge boss comes flying overhead, and this represented one of the biggest difficulty spikes I've experienced with a game in a long time. This was a brutal boss encounter, and it took me around 40 minutes of attempts before I got it down. As I said earlier, I really do like to be challenged, and bosses taking a long time to clear is kind of par for the course in From Software games. But this was the first boss, in what was essentially a tutorial stage. I actually thought you were supposed to lose because of how much damage the boss was doing. And the reason that even crossed my mind was because in past From Software games, there have been some difficult boss encounters in the tutorials. But the big difference is you weren't expected to win. It was cool that you could win, and playing those games over and beating them was very satisfying. But it wasn't going to gate you if you couldn't. Here you have to win. 10 minutes into the game, and there is a huge gate where a lot of the fun stuff is locked behind. For example, you can't even customize your armored core until after you defeat this boss. So here's the thing, I could almost understand if this was done as a "you need to be this tall to ride" sort of deal, if this acted as a floor to the difficulty. But that wasn't the case. The next couple of missions are very relaxed in comparison. And another strange choice is, the real tutorials aren't unlocked until you beat this boss. Like, what kind of sense does that make? And those tutorials, they teach you some important things that aren't obvious, such as how to reload your guns. It's not exactly an intuitive button combination. Like, I actually thought that you couldn't manually reload until after I did the tutorial. And you also learn about staggering, which would have been very helpful to know for the first boss. As much as I love to be challenged, I really think they missed the mark here. I don't think the introduction needed to be that hard. It was almost like they wanted to challenge veteran players right out the gate. But the way I look at challenge is that it should increase incrementally throughout the game. It doesn't make sense, at least to me, for the first level or mission or boss to be harder than the content that comes directly after it. And that's not me saying the game doesn't get harder, it absolutely does. It's just that the next couple of missions are nowhere near as hard as the first. Now, the real kicker is that the first boss isn't even really all that hard. I think a lot of the difficulty I had was from being new to the game and still getting a handle on the controls and mechanics. I think the boss would have been better placed after you've done some of the other missions. So what they basically did here is, imagine if in Sekiro, if you had to beat Genichiro at the end of the tutorial. Sure, it's doable, but when you are new to the game and still trying to get a handle on everything, it would be a pretty unfair thing to ask. By the way, it's not just From Software that has done something like this. Another game that recently came out that made the first boss way too hard is Wo Long. And of course, the next couple of areas and boss fights afterwards were nowhere near as demanding. So it begs the question, why make the first boss so hard? I get that these games are marketed as being difficult, and players expect to be challenged with them. But should there really be a gate right at the start? Isn't it better to ease a player into it instead of dashing all their hopes and dreams right away? So coming back to Armored Core 6, I can't even imagine how many players were completely turned off from the rest of the game because of the first boss. And that's kind of sad because The game is fantastic. It's one of my favorite games of the year. Anyways, that'll be all for this one. What are your thoughts on making the first boss or area so difficult? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, please like and subscribe, and until next time, bye!